Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. So part of what we do here on the channel and what we share is the fact that we only grocery shop every 6 to 8 weeks. And once we do that, we have to bring everything home and we have to organise it and process it and preserve it and all that sort of thing to get us through that 6 to 8 week period. We do get a food hamper from an organisation called A4 Community Care in the middle of the month. It'll be the 8th of April this month is when it's apparently due, which has some fresh produce, some snacks for the kids and things like that, and as well sometimes some meat to top things up. It is what it is. But other than that, we generally speaking don't buy any other food during that 6 to 8 weeks. Darryl will buy a 3-litre milk maybe once a week to use to ferment our milk kefir, and occasionally at the end of the month we buy potatoes or carrots, just some staples, but generally speaking we don't. So what we have to do is we have to use the stuff that we buy in the 6-week shopping haul appropriately to last us for that month, along with and further, like some of this stuff lasts us much longer than each shopping period. Now the problem this month has been that our second fridge, which we use for all the produce that we buy, has died. So it is not cooling at all. The freezer is running though, so we're thinking it's a fan issue. We've defrosted the freezer. We're trying to take the back plate off the fridge to check that fans are running and things like that. But at the moment it's still not working, which means that the zucchini, which were already a little funky, are going funky really quickly and we have to use them up. The tomatoes the same. Any sort of tomato that has a break in the skin is going to go bad sitting in that temperature, in that humidity. The carrots will go black because of the humidity if we cannot keep them dry, so we keep on pulling it out and drying out the fridge area and stuff like that. We did put some ice bricks in the fridge to try and use it as a giant esky, but that of course creates more moisture too, so we're running into problems there. The other thing is the box of mushrooms are going slimy really quickly. I have to get them done today. But in the meantime, it means that we are processing a lot of food, and each 6-weekly, I totally rambled then, but anyway, each 6-weekly shop, what I do is I tend to do daily videos from that point forward for 7 to 10 days, depending on how long it takes me to get through everything, to show you what I do with all of that food to get us through that 6 to 8 weeks. So that's what I'm starting. I'm a little late on starting them, and they may not end up being daily at this rate because there's just too much to get done. So I'll record all the stuff every day, but it may not be released every day. So this was the first major day of prep, and it was the day that we realized that the fridge wasn't working, because I get home on a Friday night and I don't normally start the major prep until the Monday, because I spend the weekend recovering and organizing things and doing any sort of admin that I had missed. I get the video for the grocery haul out and all that sort of thing, but we didn't have that luxury this month, so I had to start on the Sunday. It's actually Tuesday morning now that I'm doing this intro and voiceover, but this is Sunday was the first day that I was doing the food prep because we realized the fridge wasn't working. So let me show you what we got done for Sunday, which is the first day of meal prep post this month's monthly 6-weekly grocery haul, and come along and check it out. Thanks guys. Alright, so as I said, the fridge isn't working, which means I need to make sure that I'm using anything that isn't going to last very long without the fridge. So we had a few bags of miscellaneous vegetables, some broccoli. The cabbages will do fine, we'll just lose more of the outer leaves, but the broccoli will not do very well, zucchini, all that sort of thing. So what I did for breakfast today was I did a vegetable scramble. I did cut up broccoli and zucchini, some bacon, potato, onion, and all that sort of stuff fried up, and then scrambled like 20 eggs, and that's what the kids and Darryl and I had for, it was Darryl and my breakfast, and it was the kids' lunch and stuff. So we did breakfast scramble, trying to use up some of those veggies right off the bat. While I was working on the next set of things, I got Sonnet to cut up some tomatoes for me. So Sonnet helped me last time I did processing of tomatoes, and I showed her how to cut the tomatoes in half and just take the cores out and then cut them into quarters and put them on baking trays. So she did a large majority of the tomatoes and did that for me. So she cut the cores out, cut any spots off them, put them in the cast iron baking trays. She sat at the table and did it, so it was out of my way and it was easier for her. And then she put them all in the baking trays. We put the baking trays into the barbecue, which is my oven, and she salted them for me, and then we roasted them so that we could use them for something else. That got them done and out of the way. Worst comes to worst, they could go in the fridge roasted, though fridge room probably not at the moment, but on a normal occasion they could have, but they're cooked and done, and that's the main thing. While we got those tomatoes were roasting, I started on Bolognese. So one of the first things that we have to get done in the first few days of a grocery trip is ground beef or mince or hamburger or whatever you want to call it. I say this nearly every time. Ground beef has a lot of surface area, so it has a really short date. It's not vacuum sealed, it's just put in plastic. So I think the use by dates on them are 24 hours. We're okay with 48 to 72 as long as they're put into the fridge. That's a personal comfort level, that one, but I think the use by date on it's only 24 hours. So we try and use the mince up in the first couple of days. That's one of the first things we do. So I make bolognese up in big batches and I freeze it. I don't like the texture of ground beef or beef mince canned, so this is something that I save freezer space. So because the bolognese uses lots of vegetables as well, that's what I got done today is too. So I use a lot of vegetables and I mince them all up. So I use the Thermomix because that minces things up nice and easily, and I mince up zucchini, carrot, onion, celery and mushrooms. I put some of the bacon bits that I got on clearance as well and put it all in a pan, in a pot, and I'm using my big buffalo canner here because it's a big batch, and I fry it off until some of the moisture is removed with a little bit of oil. Once all that is cooked off, I add the mince. So I used 1 full pack of mince, so it's around about 4 kilos of mince, and broke that up into the veggies and let that brown off, breaking it up as I went through. Once it was all broken up and cooked off, I started adding all the tomato products. So bolognese is one of those dishes that is very different for every person, and I think if you look up the authentic bolognese, most of them have next to no tomato products in them at all. They're actually a brown sauce, not a red sauce. But anyway, this is our version of what we call bolognese. So I have all those vegetables in it, and then I add all the tomatoes. I use tin crushed tomatoes, I use tomato paste, and I use passata. And I've used some water to swish out those jars before emptying them back into the pot as well, to make sure that there was all the tomatoey goodness was taken out of those jars as well. I used a jar of my mushrooms that are canned in stock for some more liquid and some flavour. I add some spices, so I add smoked paprika, some Worcestershire sauce, balsamic vinegar. They're all flavours that I enjoy in bolognese. I stir it all up and let it simmer. So my bolognese will cook on and off all day, and then in the evening we'll package it up. So we're going to let it simmer for a while and cook off some of that liquid. While that was happening, I made brioche burger rolls for dinner. So we're going to use some more of that mince for dinner because we won't eat this bolognese tonight. This will be for the freezer. So we could eat it tonight, but we won't just because I'm getting stuff done. So I did brioche burger rolls for dinner. I used the Thermomix to knead it all. It's a big batch. It looks like it shouldn't fit in the Thermomix, but it does the way I do it. When the dough's kneading, it takes quite a while to knead because it's an enriched dough. I added some fillers to the bolognese. So we like to add some pearled barley is normally what I use to my bolognese, but I went looking through my crates and I was sure I had another 5 kilo bag of pearl barley and I couldn't find it. So I went hunting through other crates and found a bag, a 375 gram bag that I must have bought from the supermarket before I bought it in bulk. So I added that to the bolognese, but normally I would add a kilo and a half. So I then added some of the chana dal, which is what the split peas that we used for making our dal. Now these don't break down quite as soft as the pearl barley, so I don't normally use them because the kids can have a little bit of an issue with it, but Darryl and I don't mind, and in the end they'll get over it. So that's what we put in there to bulk it up. Add a bit of liquid if needed just for it to cook in. Normally I would add chicken stock or something, which I have jars of on the shelf, so just a bit more liquid in there to help with that. A bit of salt if needed, a little bit of sugar to cut the acidity of the tomatoes if needed. Just taste it and go with it, and then I just simmer it until the lentils and the barley has softened to a point where they become part of it, not a separate. They're not going to startle you when you're taking a mouthful of the bolognese. They're going to be part of the texture of it. Once the dough was kneaded, I put it in a bowl with some cling wrap to rise. I'm trying out this new compostable cling wrap. I found it half price at Coles or Woolies. I showed it in the grocery haul. It has perforations every 30 centimeters, which it's a bit of a pro and a con, but it seems to be sticking to the bowls really well. So I'll keep you updated as I go using that in different methods, but it seemed to work quite well over this bowl. And if I can find a compostable cling wrap, then that would be wonderful. It would make me feel a lot less horrible about using cling wrap. So then we had the rest of the tomatoes. So Sonnet had cut some more up for me that we hadn't fit in the barbecue, and then I still had some in the fridge. So I decided to make some salsa. We have half a dozen jars of salsa on the shelf, but if we're going to be working on using the black beans and burritos and things like that, then I thought salsa would be a good thing to have on the shelf. So, and I don't like salsa from, like I can make most tomato products from canned tomatoes if I need to, but I like salsa from fresh tomatoes. So I cut them all up the same way, just cut them up, took the core out and any bad spots off them, and then I use my Thermomix. So I like a really fresh tasting salsa. I don't peel my tomatoes, I don't de-seed them, nothing like that. All I do is I throw it in the Thermomix for 5 seconds to let it dice up, basically, and then I pour it in a pot. I take basic measurements of cup measures as I'm putting it into the pot, just so that I've got a ratio for the other ingredients, and that so that I know how much of other things I can add to it, because the tomatoes are the safe ingredient, the other things aren't as safe. I added some garlic, which I have this gorgeous elephant garlic that I bought in bulk, which is supposed to be being turned into conserva too, and I haven't got there yet. I would love to plant some of it too, but I've had such bad luck with planting garlic lately that sometimes I think maybe I'm better off just using it and buying some for use and just not trying to garden this year, basically. And then I add onions. You can use whatever onions you like, spring onions, green onions. I use a standard brown because that's what we have, and I mince it up in the Thermomix because we don't like big chunks of onion, but you could dice it up into whatever size you want for that. But I'm not real keen on the crunch of onion when I'm eating things, and because the salsa is not heavily cooked, then you still have a bit of that crunch in it, so I prefer to do them nice and small. That means that we're going to get lots of flavour without that crunch. Now I add jalapenos to my salsa. I didn't have any fresh, so I have a couple of bags of minced up jalapenos in the freezer that I'm going to use to make another batch of cowboy candy. So all I did was break off some chunks of that and stick it in the Thermomix to dice it up as well, and put that in there. It has apple cider vinegar and salt in it, and I'd normally add some lime juice, but I don't have any limes, but I got a whole lot of lemons, so I used the lemons. Now the lemon juice isn't part of the acid needed for the canning to be safe, so you can use fresh lemons rather than canned lemons, because it's just a flavor thing. Put it on the stove, bring it up to a boil, turn it down and simmer for about 15 minutes. At 15 minutes, turn it off. So while that was simmering, I shaped out the hamburger buns. I divided into 16 buns, which is 2 per person, and then that way they can have 2 at dinner if that's what they want, or they can have 1 the next day. Personal preference there. So all I did was break it up into approximately 16 even pieces, and then bring it together into a nice ball with a tight skin on it. You want the nice tight skin so that it rises and has that air inside it. I use a little semolina on the tray to stop the buns from sticking, and I only put 8 to a tray because that way they're going to spread out a little bit rather than up. Normally I crowd them a little bit more, but then they end up more like a dinner roll shape rather than a hamburger shape, so I wanted them to spread outwards a little bit. I used the new compostable wrap here too, and it seemed to stick to the trays quite well, so as I said, I'll keep you updated on that, and I'll have to keep an eye out on buying more if it seems to be working quite well. After that, I started filling the jars with the salsa. Because I don't want to cook the salsa down, because I don't want to make everything nice and soggy, what I want to do is use the whole tomatoes. Because I don't want to cook it down and lose some of the water, and because I use the whole tomatoes, seeds and all, it's going to be a little wet. So what I do is I use a slotted spoon to get the solids into the jars, and just pick it up with a slotted spoon, put it in the funnel, fill the jars with the solids as much as possible. I'm using a bunch of supermarket or reusable lug lid jars here for it because it's just being water bathed. I don't have any ball mason style lids at the moment, and I tend to use my Fowler's jars for specific things or for pressure canning. So these reusable jars are really good for salsa. I filled all the jars, and at one point I used a colander to empty some of the excess liquid off. I put all the solids through the colander to take some of the excess liquid off right at the bottom. It's just quicker to do it that way. Once all the jars were full, I cleaned the rims well with white vinegar as per usual, and then clean the insides of the lids. These are brand new lids as well, with a bit of vinegar too. Twist the lids on firmly and then put them in the steam canner. You want to twist the lids on a little more firmly than you twist a ring on a jar, but if you go too hard, they'll actually jump the lugs and you'll feel it jump it. So you don't want to do that. You want it firm so that when you're picking the jar up by the lid, there's no movement in the jar, but not so firm that you're skipping the lug on the jar, the thread on the jar. And then I put them in the steam canner. So the steam canner is the same process as water bath canning. For me, it's 25 minutes because my altitude's over 1,000 feet. And then the 25 minutes starts once it hits the dark green. As the dark green is what's needed for my altitude. There is a light green as well for under 1,000 feet. This is what the bolognese look like once it's done. So I like my bolognese to be really nice and thick. It's easier to store in the freezer, to bag up and store. And when I when we reheat it, we reheat a bag of the bolognese, and then we put a jar of the pasta sauce that I make in can as well. So my pasta sauce has vegetables and stuff in it too, tomato based, thinner, and then so that goes in with the bolognese, and then it ends up being the right consistency. And it makes it easier to have that liquid when you're heating up the solids as well, because it stops the solids from burning. So that's just how we do it. I did can up the rest of the tomato water as I had room in the canner for when I was doing the next batch of something else, so it just made sense to do it. It is basically just tomato juice. You can cook it down and make it thicker, things like that. But this particular tomato water or tomato juice, whatever, is kind of spicy and oniony because it's got the jalapenos and the onion that were cooked in there as well. So it'll be a really nice liquid to use for in some sort of like a Mexican beef or beans dish or something, I reckon. So it was worth putting on the shelf anyway, and I had room in the canner. So it was worth doing. I then started working on the trays of the roasted tomatoes. So I just puree them in batches in the Thermomix until they're smooth. You have to make sure you don't overload whatever you're using to puree them, the Thermomix or a food processor or whatever else, because you want them really nice and smooth, because otherwise you have those little strings of tomato skin in them, which are okay in some dishes, but it depends on how you're eating it. And we'll probably use this as tomato soup base, so you want it to be nice and thin and smooth. Nice and thick and smooth without those little strings of skin, because they can just feel funny on your tongue when you're having them otherwise. Just a vaguely unpleasant mouthfeel. So I just canned it as is. The tomatoes were roasted with a bit of salt, and that's it. I did add a bit of lemon juice to each of the jars, just because there's the whole debate about the acidity of tomatoes these days not being as high as the acidity of tomatoes previously, so they need some acid added to them. I don't know where these tomatoes originated from or what the acidity is, so I added a bit of lemon juice. I would normally add citric acid because citric acid doesn't have any flavour. But I couldn't find my jar. I think I must have used the end of it, so I need to order some more. And if it goes into a tomato soup base, then lemon juice really isn't going to impact that at all. I debubbled it using the back of a spatula. One day I may find my packing stick again, probably when I order a new one, because that's how things normally happen. But for the moment, I tend to use the back of a spatula, anything that's not metal. Back of a plastic spatula, back of a wooden spatula, just clean it and use it to debubble what I'm doing to make sure that the headspace is correct. These are the 1 litre jars, which my ghee and stuff comes in. They use an 82ml lid, and I use these for a lot of things. I find them really handy. I probably will end up buying some on their own, because I will run short when I stop buying as much ghee and things like that. And we've used a lot of them for storing the lard in and that sort of thing. So as I change my habits and can more and use more 1 litre jars, we may need more for that. I topped up the steam canner tray with some water, so it brought back up to the level of the tray, because some had evaporated in the previous processing, and put the jars in there and ran it a second time, exactly the same process as the first time. So this is how we store the bolognese. We put it in 1 gallon Ziploc freezer bags in 1.2 to 1.4 kilo-ish lots in those bags. I try and reuse these bags as much as possible. It's not always easy because they get torn when food comes out of them sometimes, but I store them in the freezer. So I wash them out, store them in the freezer so that they're clean and usable for anything else. So I have just a bag of bags in the freezer that I pull these bags out from to use for various different things. I try and label them as to what was in them previously and try and store the same things in them, but in the end it's not really that relevant, so long as it's stored in the freezer and it's not left to go out anywhere. So I got 11 batches of bolognese out of this 1 pack of mince, which is about 4 kilo mince. So there's 11 meals there for the 8 of us, though regularly it goes to the 6 of us, and Darryl and I will have something slightly different. There'll be leftovers that we have and they have bolognese or something like that, but it can feed the 8 of us if need be. But the kids regularly can eat it on their own too and have some leftovers for lunch the next day. For dinner we're having hamburgers, as I said, so that's why I made the hamburger patty, the hamburger buns, but again it's using up some of that mince that needs using. So I pulled out the other packet of mince. So I only bought 2 packets of mince this trip, so I pulled out the second packet of mince and I put about 1.8 kilos aside to use for hamburger buns, and the rest of it I put in 2 Ziploc bags, or 2 vacuum sealed bags, in the freezer for use later on in the month. I don't know what I'll use them for yet, but I'll find something. And we always have half a dozen of these 1 kilo bags of mince sitting in the freezer somewhere, because they're a really simple thing to pull out and find something to do with nachos, loaded potatoes. I've been making pastizio a bit lately, all that sort of thing. Sometimes I make lasagna soup if I've got some excess stock and things like that, so they're good to have in the freezer. The mince that I'm using for the hamburger patties, all I do is add a bit of salt and onion powder to it and bring it together without working it too much, just sort of blend those spices through it. I use my cast iron tortilla press to press my meat patties, completely unnecessary, but it makes them a bit like a smashed patty, because I don't mold the patty. I just put a lump of it in the middle and then push it, and so it ends up with a bit more texture to it than if you were worked the meat a little bit more. But it also spreads it nice and thin and even, and then when you stick it on the hot plate, it shrinks up, but it shrinks up fairly evenly, and it has, as I said, it's just a nice texture. I just find it easy to do, to just quickly whack it on the tortilla press, throw it in the pan, and it might seem really silly to some people, but it's how we do it. So I had bought spinach that I was going to use on these hamburger buns, because the lettuces at Costco were really, there was only half a dozen on the shelf, and all of them looked a little meh. So I grabbed baby spinach to use for a few things. I was going to use it in some pasta, and then we used it on something the other day, and then I was going to use it for the hamburgers, but because the fridge died, that's one of the first things that went yuck. So leafy greens do not do well in warm temperatures. The ducks adored it though. They love leafy greens, so the ducks had a nice feast of it, but it just meant that we didn't have anything green on the burgers. So we just had the standard tomato, mayo, apple butter barbecue, meat patties, and I had some cheese on mine. The kids had ketchup as well, I think. I do the patties about 90 grams, but the patties that I do for Darryl and I do them half of whatever is left, and then so that we can have like a double-decker patty, because I like to put cheese between the two patties sort of thing, but it ends up being the same amount of meat anyway. And that was dinner, so we didn't have anything with that, we just had burgers. But we had veggies for breakfast, didn't we? I think we had veggies with breakfast, so, you know, it evens out in the end, everything in moderation and all that. But that was dinner. So that was the first day. Now, the voiceover on this may be a little shifted, because to top off everything else that's going on, I did have 3 camera batteries. 2 of them were a generic brand. One was the Nikon brand, and the 2 generic ones have now died, so I only have 1 battery, which means that I can only use the camera until it's flat, and then charge it and then use it. And so I've been interchanging with my phone for some things, and a friend, Analia, gave me her old GoPro, and I've got it here in a container, but I haven't even charged it to try yet, so I need to get that sorted, because I might be able to use that in the kitchen sometimes, and while this battery's charging. And anyway, things got a little bit messy again today while I was still trying to catch up on everything, so hopefully the audio syncs up all right when I take it in to the house. But thank you for joining me on this day of food prep, and I will see you again shortly with the next day. As I said, I'm filming every day's food prep, but whether I get the videos out every day is yet to be seen, so we will see how it goes. But thanks guys for joining me, and I will see you next time.